The new nanny stepped into the wide gates of the mansion with quiet steps. Her heart beat a little faster as she looked at the tall building, its windows shining like glass under the sun. She had never worked in a house so big before. The air smelled of roses from the garden, and the sound of fountains splashing water filled the silence. She reminded herself she wasn't here to be impressed. She was here for a job. A man in a dark suit met her at the entrance. His face was serious, almost cold. He gave her a quick glance, the kind of look that measured a person in seconds. "Your duty is simple," he said flatly. "Take care of my daughter. Remember, she cannot hear you. Don't waste your time talking. Do what is needed and nothing more." The nanny nodded, but something about the way he said it made her chest heavy. She followed him down the long marble hallway, her shoes tapping softly against the floor. Portraits of old men and women lined the walls, their painted eyes watching her. Finally, they reached a small room at the corner of the house. There, sitting quietly by the window, was the girl. Her small hands rested on her lap, and she stared out at the garden, as if the world outside belonged to someone else. She didn't even turn when the door opened. The father's voice softened for the first time. "This is my daughter," he said, though there was no warmth in his tone. "She's different. Don't expect too much." And with that, he walked away, leaving the nanny standing in the silence. The nanny took a careful step forward. She looked at the little girl, no older than 7 or 8, with long hair falling gently over her shoulders. Something about the child's stillness pulled at her heart. She bent down slowly, trying not to startle her, and placed a small toy on the floor. A wooden horse with chipped paint. The girl's eyes shifted, following the movement. She didn't touch the toy, but she had seen it. The nanny gave a small smile, even though she knew the girl wouldn't notice. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Hello. I'm here to be your friend." The girl's gaze flickered for a moment, then returned to the window. The nanny stayed in the room longer than she needed to, arranging the girl's books, folding a blanket, placing fresh flowers in a vase. All the while, she watched the child carefully. Every small move, every flicker of her eyes. Something was strange. The girl seemed to notice more than she was supposed to. Later that evening, when the nanny carried a tray with milk and biscuits, she let one spoon fall gently on the tray by mistake. The metal clinked softly. To her surprise, the girl's head turned toward the sound. The nanny froze. Did she imagine it? No, she was sure. The child reacted. Her mind began racing. Could it be possible? She decided not to ask questions too soon. Instead, she placed the tray down, handed the glass of milk to the girl, and watched quietly. The girl sipped slowly, eyes still lowered. When night came, the nanny sat by the bed while the little one lay under the blanket. The room was dim, only the lamp glowing on the table. She thought of saying a prayer or telling a story, but then she remembered the father's warning. She cannot hear. Still, she couldn't resist. She leaned closer and whispered a gentle lullaby she remembered from her own childhood. Her voice was soft, barely above a breath. The little girl didn't move, but her eyelashes fluttered slightly. The nanny felt a shiver run down her spine. She decided to try again another day. The next morning, she noticed something else. When the curtains moved with the wind, the fabric rustled softly. The girl's eyes followed the sound as if she could hear it. And when a bird chirped outside, her lips curved just a little, like she knew a secret. The nanny's heart ached. Could it be that the girl wasn't truly deaf? Or was it just her mind playing tricks? At lunch, she carefully tapped her finger on the table, making a gentle rhythm. The girl's eyes shifted again. Not just once, but twice. It was no accident. That night, when she tucked the girl into bed, she whispered once more just a simple word. "Good night." For a moment, there was nothing. Then, she thought she saw the girl's lips tremble, almost forming the same word back. It was so quick, so fragile, like a shadow that disappeared before you could catch it. The nanny's breath caught in her throat. She leaned back, her mind spinning. Why would the father say she was deaf if she wasn't? Why keep such a truth hidden? She lay awake in her own room, staring at the ceiling, thinking of the child's silent eyes, her shy smile, and those tiny reactions no one else seemed to notice. Something was wrong here, deeply wrong. And though she had only just arrived, the nanny felt a heavy responsibility pressing on her heart. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was the beginning of a mystery she had to uncover. The next day began with the soft light of morning spilling into the mansion's hallways. The nanny carried a basket of folded clothes down the corridor, her mind heavy with questions. She couldn't stop thinking about the little girl's quiet reactions from the night before, the way her eyelashes fluttered at the sound of a lullaby, the way her head turned when the spoon fell. If she could hear even a little, why had her father declared her deaf? She reached the girl's room and opened the door gently. The child was sitting on the floor, arranging blocks in a neat line. She looked up briefly, then back to her toys. The nanny walked over and knelt beside her. Slowly, she tapped one block against another, making a soft clicking sound. The girl's head tilted slightly, as though listening. The nanny whispered, almost afraid to believe her own eyes. "Can you hear me?" The girl's hand stilled. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then she picked up another block and continued stacking, her face calm, but her eyes distant. The nanny didn't push. She understood there was something fragile here, something that couldn't be forced. At lunch, the dining table looked like it belonged in a palace, silver cutlery, crystal glasses, and dishes the nanny didn't even know the names of. The father sat at the head of the table, scanning a newspaper with little interest in what was happening around him. The girl sat quietly on his right, not making a sound, her fork moving slowly across the plate. The nanny watched closely. When a servant accidentally dropped a spoon on the marble floor, the sharp sound rang through the room. The girl's shoulders flinched before she caught herself, quickly returning to stillness. The nanny noticed. The father didn't. After lunch, the father stood, folded his paper, and said coldly, "I will be out for meetings. See that she rests." Without another word, he left the room. The nanny glanced at the girl, who was staring down at her plate as if she wished to vanish. There was something in her small, tense posture that made the nanny's heart ache. Later that afternoon, the nanny took her out into the garden. The roses were blooming in rows, their scent filling the air. Bees buzzed lazily among the petals, and the sound of birds echoed from the trees. The little girl walked slowly, her tiny shoes crunching on the gravel path. The nanny picked a flower and held it out. The girl looked at it, then at her, and for the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. It was small, shy, but it was real. The nanny returned the smile. She decided to try something. Humming softly, she let the tune float in the air as they walked. She chose a simple melody, one that could easily be remembered. At first, the girl didn't react. But then, as the tune carried on, she glanced up with wide eyes, as though surprised. The nanny's heart skipped. Was it possible she recognized it? She hummed again, slower this time. The girl's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. "Do you like it?" the nanny asked gently. For a moment, nothing. Then the girl's tiny hand reached out and tugged at the edge of her dress, almost like an answer. The nanny bent down, her voice low but steady. "It's okay. You don't have to be afraid with me." The girl didn't speak, but her eyes softened, filled with something the nanny hadn't seen before, trust mixed with fear. That evening, while helping the girl change into her nightclothes, the nanny decided to test again. She stood by the window, her back turned, and whispered softly, "If you can hear me, touch the blanket." Her pulse raced as she waited. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Then, slowly, the blanket moved. The girl's small fingers pressed against it, deliberate and careful. The nanny turned, eyes wide, but the child had already looked away, pretending nothing had happened. Her chest tightened. She wanted to shout with joy, to tell someone, to prove this wasn't just her imagination. But deep inside, she knew she couldn't, not yet. The father wouldn't believe her. Worse, he might get angry, and the girl could be the one to suffer. That night, lying in her own bed, the nanny stared into the darkness. The truth was clearer than ever now. The girl wasn't deaf. She could hear. But then why did she live in silence? Why was she too afraid to respond openly? The answer came slowly, like a heavy weight sinking into her thoughts. It wasn't because she couldn't hear. It was because she had been taught not to. Taught to stay silent. Taught to hide what she could do. The nanny turned to the ceiling, whispering to herself, who would silence their own child? She thought of the father's cold eyes, his distant tone, his words at the very beginning. Don't waste your time talking. She cannot hear you. But what if he wasn't mistaken? What if he knew? The nanny's heart ached for the little girl curled up alone in her bed down the hall. Tomorrow, she promised herself, she would find out more. The truth was close, and she was no longer just curious. She was determined. This child deserved a voice, and she would do everything she could to help her find it. The next morning arrived heavy with clouds. The sky outside was gray, and the air smelled like rain. The nanny woke up early, her mind still caught in the puzzle she had uncovered. The girl wasn't deaf, she was silenced. But by whom? And why? These questions stayed in her thoughts like shadows that would not leave. When she entered the child's room, she found her curled up by the window again, staring out at the dripping leaves. The girl's face was calm, almost expressionless, but her eyes told a different story. They held a quiet sadness, the kind that seemed far too deep for someone her age. The nanny knelt beside her and gently brushed a lock of hair away from her cheek. "Do you want to draw today?" she whispered softly. The girl turned her head slightly. Then, without speaking, she nodded. It was the first clear response she had given. The nanny's heart skipped. She brought out a box of crayons and paper, setting them on the little table by the bed. They sat together, drawing shapes. Houses, flowers, a sun peeking from clouds. The nanny sketched a bird with wings stretched wide. She made a soft chirp sound as she colored. The girl's hand froze. Her head tilted as if listening. Then, almost shyly, she drew a tiny bird beside the nanny's. The nanny smiled. She wanted to praise her, to tell her how beautiful it looked, but before she could, the heavy footsteps of the father echoed in the hallway. The girl stiffened immediately, her small shoulders tensing. She dropped the crayon and sat still, her hands folding in her lap. The father entered, his eyes sharp. He looked at the paper on the table, then at the nanny. "She should not waste her time," he said coldly. "She cannot understand. Don't fill her head with useless things." The nanny lowered her eyes, biting back her words. She wanted to shout, "She understands everything." But she stayed silent. The father lingered for a moment, then walked away, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. The girl let out a breath she had been holding. The nanny noticed her small hands tremble before she quickly hid them under the table. That moment confirmed it. Fear lived inside this child. Fear of her own father. Later that evening, after dinner, the nanny decided to try again. She sat by the girl's bed and told her a simple story. She spoke softly, watching carefully. Halfway through, the girl's lips parted, and in the faintest whisper, she said a single word. "More." The nanny froze. Her eyes filled with tears she fought to hide. She leaned closer, her voice trembling. "You can speak." The child's eyes darted toward the door, then back at the nanny. She gave the smallest nod. The nanny's chest tightened. She whispered, "Why don't you speak to him? To your father?" The girl's lower lip quivered. She pulled the blanket up to her chin and whispered so softly it was barely a breath. "Papa said no. He said I must stay quiet. Always." The words stabbed the nanny's heart. Her breath caught. She wanted to hold the child and tell her none of it was true, but the girl had already closed her eyes, pretending to sleep. That night, the nanny sat awake for hours. The truth was cruel. This wasn't a mistake, it was control. The father knew his daughter could hear and speak. He had silenced her because he believed she was different. Because, in his cold world, different meant shame. The nanny pressed her palms together, whispering to herself, "He has stolen her voice." The next day, she decided she couldn't stand by anymore. If the girl could trust her enough to whisper, then she had to build on that trust. Slowly, carefully, she started small. While they walked in the garden, she hummed the same lullaby. This time, she left the tune unfinished, pausing in the middle. The girl hesitated, then hummed the next note softly, like a secret past in the air. The nanny nearly cried from joy. She whispered, "Beautiful." The girl's eyes lit up only for a second, before fear clouded them again. She glanced around as though someone might be listening. The nanny knelt, taking her small hand in both of hers. "It's safe with me," she whispered. "You don't have to be afraid when it's just us." The girl didn't reply, but her grip tightened slightly around the nanny's fingers. That night, when the house was quiet and the father gone to his study, the nanny heard a tiny knock at her door. She opened it to find the girl standing there, clutching her blanket. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she whispered, "Story." The nanny's throat closed with emotion. She brought the child inside, wrapped her in a soft shawl, and told her a story by candlelight. The little girl listened with rapt attention, her eyes shining. At the end, she whispered a single word again, "More." The nanny smiled through her tears. This wasn't just a child's request. It was a plea for love, for freedom, for the chance to be heard. But in the back of her mind, one thought kept burning. What would happen if the father discovered what she knew? The mansion felt colder the next morning, though the sun was bright outside. The nanny walked down the hallway, her steps slow, her mind heavy. She had heard the truth from the child's own lips. Papa said no. He said I must stay quiet. Always. Those words echoed in her ears. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. The father had chosen silence for his daughter. When she entered the girl's room, she found her sitting on the floor with a doll in her lap. The doll's face was painted with a smile, but the way the child held it was careful, almost protective, as though it too carried secrets. The nanny sat beside her, whispering, "Good morning." The girl glanced at her, then at the door, and whispered back, "Morning." The nanny's heart leapt. A full word, spoken clearly. She wanted to cheer, but she forced herself to stay calm. She smiled gently, placing a finger to her lips. "Shoo, just us." The girl nodded, her eyes shining with trust. That afternoon, while the father was away, the nanny decided to gather proof. She pulled out a small notebook she kept in her apron and began writing down each moment she had seen, the flinched sounds, the whispered words, the humming in the garden. If the father confronted her, she would have something to show. But deep inside, she knew words on a page would not be enough. She needed him to see it, with his own eyes. Later, in the kitchen, she overheard two servants whispering while washing dishes. "It's such a pity," one said softly. "She's a sweet child. But the master, he doesn't want anyone to know." "Know what?" the other asked. "That she's not perfect. He says people would laugh at him. A man of his status, with a daughter who isn't like the others." The nanny's blood ran cold. So that was it. It wasn't about the girl at all. It was about his pride. He was willing to let the world believe his daughter was broken rather than face the thought of anyone questioning him. She clenched her fists, her chest burning with anger. A father's job was to protect, to love, to lift a child higher. Instead, he had pushed her into silence, trapping her in a prison of fear. That night, as she tucked the girl into bed, the nanny whispered softly, "Do you want to say something?" The child hesitated, her small hands twisting in the blanket. Finally, she whispered, "I want to talk." Tears filled the nanny's eyes. She leaned close, holding her hand. "Then you will. I promise you. One day you will." The girl's lips trembled into a smile. It was the first real smile the nanny had seen. But the peace of the night didn't last long. As she stepped out of the room, she found the father standing at the end of the hallway, his arms crossed, his eyes cold. "You're spending too much time," he said sharply. "She doesn't need stories. She doesn't need false hope." The nanny swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "She needs love. She needs to be treated like a child, not a burden." His eyes narrowed. "You will do as you're told, or you can leave." The nanny lowered her gaze, biting her tongue. Arguing now would only put the girl in danger. She nodded quickly, but inside, her determination grew stronger. She could not stay silent anymore. The next day, she came up with a plan. She would not fight him with words. She would show him the truth. She would make it impossible for him to deny. When evening came, and the father sat in the study with his papers, the nanny asked him politely, "Would you join us in the sitting room? Just for a moment." I want to show you something about your daughter." He looked irritated, but curious. What nonsense now? Still he followed. The girl sat on the sofa, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes flickered nervously when she saw her father, but the nanny gave her an encouraging smile. Gently, the nanny picked up a glass from a table and let it slip from her hand onto the floor. It landed with a sharp clink. The girl flinched instantly, her head turning toward the sound. The father's brow furrowed. He opened his mouth, but the nanny spoke quickly, her tone firm. "Watch again." She bent close to the girl, her voice soft but clear. "Sweetheart, can you give me the book from the table?" For a second, the girl froze. Fear clouded her face. The nanny reached out, squeezed her hand gently, and whispered, "It's okay. I'm here." The girl stood, picked up the book, and handed it to her. The father's face turned pale. The nanny's voice broke, but she kept going. "She isn't deaf. She never was. You told her to be silent. You made her believe she was broken." The father's eyes darkened, anger and shame battling across his face. He tried to speak, but the girl whispered softly, almost trembling, "Papa." The sound was fragile, but it struck like thunder. The father froze. His eyes widened, and for the first time, his cold mask cracked. The nanny's tears spilled freely. "Do you see now? She isn't broken. She just needed love. She needed you." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with all the words left unsaid for years. The room was still. The father stood frozen, the book trembling slightly in his hand. The little girl's single word, "Papa," hung in the air like a bell that refused to stop ringing. It was the sound he had never allowed himself to hear, the voice he had buried beneath pride and fear. The nanny's breath caught as she looked at the girl. She hadn't just spoken, she had dared. It was courage wrapped in a whisper. And now, the silence that had ruled the mansion for so long cracked wide open. The father's face changed slowly. His jaw tightened, his eyes flickered, and for the first time, there was no arrogance in him, only disbelief. He sank into the chair behind him, pressing a hand over his mouth as if the single word had struck him harder than any blow. The nanny knelt by the girl and wiped a tear from her cheek. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe." But the girl wasn't looking at her. Her gaze was locked on her father, wide and uncertain. Her tiny lips moved again, forming the same word, this time a little stronger. "Papa." The man let out a sound, half breath, half sob. His shoulders, always held so high, collapsed forward. For years he had told himself lies, that silencing her was protecting her, that hiding her was saving her from shame. But now, staring at her tear-streaked face, he could no longer escape the truth. He stood slowly, almost unsteady, and walked toward her. The girl shrank back, fear flickering across her face, but he knelt before her and whispered, "Say it again." She hesitated, her small hands twisting nervously in her lap. The nanny gave her a gentle nod. And then, with a trembling voice, the girl whispered, "Papa." The man's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in her young life, she saw her father cry. He gathered her into his arms, holding her close, his voice breaking. "Forgive me. Please forgive me." The nanny looked away for a moment, her own eyes burning. It was a scene too raw, too full of pain and love tangled together. She had only wanted the truth to be seen, but this was healing beginning right in front of her. The father pressed his cheek against his daughter's hair. "I was wrong," he whispered over and over. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was saving myself from the world's judgment. But I was blind. I was cruel. And I hurt you." The girl clung to him, her tiny arms tightening around his neck. She didn't fully understand the weight of his words, but she understood the warmth she had longed for. She understood that at last he was listening. The nanny stepped back quietly, giving them space. The mansion, once filled with echoes of silence, now carried a different sound. The fragile but powerful voice of a child finally heard. Days turned into weeks, and the change was undeniable. The father no longer kept his daughter hidden away. He brought tutors, not to silence her, but to help her grow. He spoke to her gently, repeating her words, encouraging her. At first her voice was broken, hesitant, like a bird testing its wings. But with each passing day, it grew steadier. The servants noticed too. The once quiet halls now echoed with laughter, small and sweet, but enough to soften every heart. The nanny often watched from the doorway, her chest swelling with quiet pride. She had only been a stranger who entered the mansion seeking work, but she had become the one who uncovered the truth, the one who gave a child her voice back. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of gold, the father approached the nanny in the garden. He looked older now, not because of time, but because the weight of guilt had finally lifted and left its marks. "You showed me what I refused to see," he said quietly. "I will never be able to repay you." The nanny shook her head. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for her. She deserves love. She deserves to be heard." The father nodded slowly, his eyes softening. "She will be. From now on, she will be." At that moment, the little girl ran across the garden, her small feet pattering on the stones. She threw her arms around the nanny's waist and looked up with a smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. The nanny bent down, holding her close. "Never stop speaking," she said gently. "Your voice is a gift. Don't let anyone take it away again." The girl nodded, her face glowing with quiet determination. And so, the mansion that had once been a house of silence became a place of sound. Laughter in the mornings, stories in the evenings, whispers of Papa echoing through the halls, and the sweet hum of a lullaby sung together. The nanny knew her time there would one day end, but she also knew the silence was broken forever. The truth had been uncovered, and with it a new beginning. The girl was no longer invisible. She was no longer voiceless. She was finally free.